a bachelor's degree from the College of Hadith. He also holds an equivalent degree in the Arabic language from the same university. Since graduating, Imam Shadeed Muhammad has been involved in Islamic education and outreach on multiple levels, using a multitude of platforms. He's lectured at many masjids and Islamic centers, colleges and universities throughout America and abroad, using classical Islamic teachings infused with a cultural context that appeals to Muslims across a multitude of spectrums and cultures. In addition, Imam Shadeed has established his own publishing company, Router Publications LLC, and has authored a total of 8 books to date. He has a production company under the same name, Router Productions LLC, that has produced an online talk show called The NIA Show, which tackles many contemporary issues in the American Islamic community. Currently, Imam Shadeed is the Imam of the Router Islamic Center of Delaware, and he conducts a series of private online courses that blends Islamic teachings with social psychology, which tackles many contemporary issues within the American Muslim diaspora. Imam Shadeed's lectures can be found on his YouTube channel, Shadeed Muhammad, as well as his daily Islamic posts, which can be found on his Facebook page, Shadeed Muhammad /Router Admin, in addition to his Instagram and Twitter pages. We're very honored and happy to have Imam Shadeed with us, inshallah, and I'll give him the floor.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, I'm grateful to be here and share some information with you guys this evening, inshallah ta'ala. Hopefully that'll boost your spirits and give you a different outlook or perspective on what we know in Islam as fitna or trials or ibtilah, trials and tribulations. So I'm going to start with a quote from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then I'll kind of segue into the discussion bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا سَبَقَتْ لِلْعَبْدِ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَنْزِلَةً لَمْ يَبْلُغْهَا بِعَمَلِهِ ابْتَلَاهُ اللَّهُ فِي جَسَدِهِ أَوْ فِي مَالِهِ أَوْ فِي وَلَدِهِ ثُمَّ صَبَّرَهُ حَتَّى يُبْلِغَهُ الْمَنْزِلَةَ الَّتِي سَبَقَتْ لَهُ مِنْهُ رواه أحمد. This hadith was collected in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and it drives home a very, very important point for us tonight. The Prophet ﷺ said that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for a servant to have a certain manzila, a certain place with him, Allah has decreed that you're going to have a certain place, a degree, a level with him, and the servant is not able to attain that level through his actions, through his deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test the servant with a number of trials and tribulations in his or her life, and then grant them the sabr, the patience that is necessary for them to endure those tests until they reach the station or the place that he has decreed for them to have. SubhanAllah. When you think about that statement, it sends a mixture of emotions. Because one, you can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the deeper implication is that Allah is testing you because He actually wants good for you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also testing you because your deeds are not enough to get you where He wants you to be. So in order for you to get to that place, He has to test you. Some of us are tested and we turn to Allah and say, why me? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed for you to have a certain place with Him, but you haven't done enough deeds to get you there. So He's going to help you get there by sending you a few tests, trials, and tribulations in your life that'll help you get to that place. He said, and the trials and tribulations can either be in your wealth, in your health, or in your children. Your wealth, your health, and your children. I want you to keep that in mind, because our subject tonight will be about one of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who was tested in all three of these areas of his life. Trials and tribulations are an inevitable part of life as human beings. It gives us an opportunity to see ourselves in real time, as we are just theories until we're tested. Everybody claims that I'm this or that, or I'm a believer, I'm a Muslim, I'm a mu'min, I'm this, I'm that. But it's all theory. Because until you have been tested, you can't actually say you are anything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tests to show us who we really are. And to show others who we really are. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ألف لام أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم وليعلمن الله الذين صبروا وليعلمن الكاذبين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, do people think that they will be left alone simply because they say they believe? Do you think Allah is going to leave you alone just because you say, I'm a believer, I'm Muslim? Do you think that this is a rhetorical question? The answer is no, you're not going to be left alone. Do people think that they will be left alone simply because they say they believe and they're not going to be tested? Indeed, we have tested those who came before you, and we will surely test you, and we will make it known. Not that Allah will know, because Allah already knows. Don't ever say that Allah is testing me because Allah wants to see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows. Lahu ilm, knowledge before creation even existed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't test us so that He can know. But the meaning of the ayah is that Allah tests you so His servants will know. Who from amongst you is truthful and who from amongst you are not truthful. Meaning truthful in terms of the claims that you make about yourself. You say that I'm one thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you with something and shows everybody else that you're actually not who you think you are. And because of these tests, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala distinguishes those who are pleased with Him and the trials and tribulations that He has given them, and those who are displeased with Him. And essentially when Allah tests you, that is a sign that He loves you. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِذَا أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ قَوْمًا ابْتَلَاهُمْ فَمَنْ رَضِيَ فَلَهُ رِضَى وَمَنْ سَخِطَ فَلَهُ سَخْطٌ. That when Allah loves you, Allah loves the people He tests them. And whoever is pleased with the test that Allah has given them, then for them is the pleasure of Allah. And whoever is displeased with the test that Allah has given them, for them is the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the greatest examples of a man who was tested in these three areas. What were the three areas again? Your wealth, your health, and your children. Wealth, health, and children. One of the greatest examples of this is a man who was tested in all three of these areas of his life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed the test after a certain amount of time because of one quality that he possessed. And the prophet that I am referring to is none other than Prophet Ayyub. Ibn Athir, he mentions in his book Al-Kamil fi Tarikh, the complete history of Islam. And Iblis سمع تجاوب الملائكة بالصلاة على أيوب. حين ذكره الله سبحانه وتعالى فحسده. Iblis, one day he heard the angels rushing to write down the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Prophet Ayyub. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised Ayyub, and the angels heard Allah praising him, and they rushed with each other to write down what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying about Prophet Ayyub. Iblis heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praising Ayyub, and immediately it ignited his jealousy. فسأل الله جل وعلا أن يسلطه عليه ليفتنه عن دينه فسلطه الله على ماله فحسب. So Shaitan goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asks Allah permission to test Ayyub in his wealth. Give me permission to test him. I want to prove to you that he is not the servant that you praised him to be. This is the same thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised. This is the same thing that Shaitan promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the children of Adam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya Bani Adam, that I indeed, that I honored the children of Adam. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, that I have honored the children of Adam. And Shaitan had ignited his jealousy. So Shaitan promises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me respite, and I promise you I can take as many of them to hell as I possibly can. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that respite has been granted to you, but you will only have authority over my servants who are not sincere. إِلَّا عِبَادِي مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. You will only have authority over my servants who are not sincere. But those who are sincere, you will get them to be misguided here or there, but they will always find their way back. Their sincerity will always find them back. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he was asked, how did he escape the whip of Mu'tasim? How did he escape the whip of Mu'tasim? And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, لو كان الصدق وضع على جرح لأبره. He said that if sincerity, truthfulness and sincerity was put on a wound, it would heal it. That's how powerful sincerity is. You sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wallahi, Allah will move mountains for you. Yusha ibn Nun asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hold the sun until he got to Palestine and fought the Jabbareen and retrieved Baytul Maqdis from him. He was afraid that he wouldn't reach Baytul Maqdis. He was afraid that he wouldn't reach Palestine before the sunset. As you know that they were not allowed to fast, they were not allowed to fight, they were not allowed to eat, do anything during the Sabbath. So he's traveling on Jumu'ah. The sun is setting, which means it's going to be the night of Saturday night. He was afraid, he saw the sun setting, and he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he said, Oh Allah, you are the controller of the heavens and the earth and the sun and the moon. Hamsik al-shams, hold the sun, stop it from moving until I get to Palestine and retrieve Baytul Maqdis from the Jabbareen. And guess what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did? He held the sun. Slowed the sun down so the sun set only after he had fought them, defeated them, and retrieved Baytul Maqdis. This is all because of a sidq, truthfulness and sincerity in your heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ said, Man saddaqa ma'Allah, saddaqahu Allah. Whoever is truthful and honest with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will be honest and truthful with you. So he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me permission, let me test Ayyub in his wealth. فَجَمَعَ إِبْلِيسِ عُظَمَاءَ أَصْحَابِهِ مِنْ أَثَارِيتِ فَأَهْلَكُوا مَالَ أَيُّوبَ كُلَّهُ وأيوب يحمد الله ولا يرجع عن الجد في عبادته والشكر له على ما أعطاه والصبر على البلاء. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Iblis permission to test Ayyub in his wealth. Iblis goes and grabs the afarit min al-jinn, the strongest and the jinn that had the most severe hatred and animosity towards the children of Adam, and he gathers them and they go to destroy and infiltrate the wealth of Ayyub. So sometimes, man, We'll finish this, inshallah ta'ala, in between the 4 rak'ahs for Taraweeh, inshallah ta'ala. I got here a little late, so that's a little bit my fault. But nonetheless, we'll do as much as we can, inshallah ta'ala, until the adhan. But he goes and he grabs a group, a party of the jinn, and he goes and wreaks havoc on the wealth of Prophet Ayyub, destroys his wealth altogether. But Ayyub, what does he do? He prays Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He never turned back on his heels in terms of his worship. His gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never changed. The scholars say if you want to know that if you are truly truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you truly love Allah, then the times that you are tested and the times that you are not tested, your love of Allah doesn't change. You want to truly test yourself and see where you are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Check the condition of your heart when you're not tested and the condition of your heart after you are tested. If your iman, your faith, and your love of Allah remains the same, then suffice it to say you really love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you find that there's some fluctuation, I'm good when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me, but I'm a little upset, a little frustrated with God when He tests me, then that is not true test. That's not the true love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As one of the scholars say, لو أدخلني الله النار لأخبرت أهل النار أني أحبه. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to put me in the hellfire, I would tell everybody in the hellfire I love Him. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing me doesn't change the way I feel about Him. Understand? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing me doesn't change the way that I feel about Him. My love for Him doesn't waver. My faith in Him doesn't waver. My tawakkul, my trust in Him doesn't waver. The Prophet ﷺ was reclining underneath a tree. The sword was hanging on a branch. A hypocrite walked up and grabbed the sword and put the sword on the neck of the Prophet ﷺ and said, "Man ya'asimuka minni ya Muhammad." Who's going to help you now, O Muhammad? And the Prophet ﷺ looked at this man like, man, I've been in situations worse than this. You think this scares me? The man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ looked the man in his face and he said, Allah. Under those circumstances, never wavered. Allah. The man was so taken aback by the Prophet ﷺ's conviction, his hands started shaking and he dropped the sword. The Prophet ﷺ picked the sword and put it to his neck and said, "Man ya'asimuka minni al-an." Who's going to protect you from me now? You don't have the conviction in God that I do. So he starts to plead with the Prophet ﷺ, "Anta khayruna wa anta kada wa kada." You're the best of us. You're the most patient of us. You are this, you're that. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Idhab." Don't ever test my faith like that. Don't ever test my tawakkul, my reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've been in situations that are far greater than this. You got a knife to my neck, nobody else around, and you ask me who's going to protect me? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No wavering in my heart. Full conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person that carries that level of conviction in this dunya is a dangerous individual. This is a dangerous person. No wavering. And these are the type of people that Shaitan fears, because he can't do anything with them. May get them to commit a sin here or there, but they will always find their way back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is it time? 1 minute. 1 minute. We'll stop. We'll continue after, inshallah. اللهم لك صمت وبك آمنت وعلى رزقك أفطرت. بسم الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح